Today, I'm finally reviewing Baldur's Gate 3. I first played most of Act 1 back in Early Access, when that came out in 2020, and then I put it down for almost 5 years. But this time, I played it all the way through to the end. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we get started on this Baldur's Gate 3 review, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoy deep, honest reviews of the games that I play. Now I'll say this up front, I very much loved this game, but probably for slightly different reasons than many people. What satisfied me the most about Baldur's Gate 3 is just how faithful it is to Dungeons & Dragons, the 2014 5e rule set to be specific. When I play D&D, I'm much less of a role player and much more of a dice roller. I'm there for tactical combat, character builds, and seeing what my character is really made of. I'm sort of a min-maxer on that front. It's just the way that I play. And Baldur's Gate 3 absolutely delivers on that front. The transition from pen and paper to Baldur's Gate 3 felt almost frictionless for me. Yes, Larian uses a few house rules, such as potions being a bonus action to use, allowing an action spell and a bonus action spell in the same turn, and initiative being a D4 instead of a D20, which actually you have to look carefully in order to realize that, because they do not specifically say that. And if you're coming from D&D, you gotta know that, because that's why so many people go on the same initiative. It's because they're only rolling D4s. But none of these changes were actually disruptive to the game. They were easy to adapt to, and the core experience felt unmistakably like Dungeons & Dragons. Also, the alert feat with its +5 bonus to initiative gets way more powerful with the D4 system. Combat is where this game truly shines for me. Every fight feels like a proper tabletop encounter translated into a digital space. Positioning matters, terrain matters, action economy matters, and the dice still have the final say. I love the variety of different environments that you get to play in Baldur's Gate 3. There's different environmental hazards, there's different enemies that you have to contend with, and they have different capabilities, and in all different kinds of settings, whether it's sewers or a big, huge goblin camp like there is in Act 1. There's so many different kinds of environments that you get to play in, and it's just a blast. It really, they just nailed combat in this game. My party was extremely martial heavy. I played with Yako, my character, who is a human fighter. I had Lae'zel, who is a Githyanki fighter. Asterion was a rogue, and Shadowheart was a cleric. That composition carried me through almost the entire campaign. While there's a massive variety of spells available, likely just most of them from the player's handbook, but they did have a few homebrew editions like Artistry of War, I think it's called, something like that. There's only one of it in the whole game, and you have to go through this whole thing to get it. No spoilers, but that was an awesome spell. But I didn't have a lot of personal spellcasting experience just because I didn't play in a party that was really spellcast heavy. My cleric, Shadowheart, was really just there to heal. So it's going to be different if you prefer to play with Gale, the wizard, or Will, the warlock. It's going to be different based on who you choose. But the variety of spells is something that I really appreciated. The game supports wildly different party compositions, and it doesn't punish you for not engaging with every system. It was really very cool that I was able to rock with that party and be so powerful. I mean, my party really packed a punch, mostly in single target combat. Now, I kind of faltered when it came to big areas of enemies, but one of the most impressive things about Baldur's Gate 3 was how much Larian thought of. It often felt like no matter what you do, the game has already accounted for it. Choices ripple outward, NPCs remember what you did, entire quest lines shift based on seemingly minor decisions. The world feels genuinely reactive in a way that very few RPGs manage. I gotta say, it felt very immersive when it's like NPCs are remembering what I did, and quest lines are reacting in ways that I didn't realize they would react in. And it's accounting for the fact that you can attack anybody. That's basically all it is, because any NPC, it could be super important for a quest. You can attack and fight that NPC and potentially win. So it's gotta account for that. And they do an excellent job at it. I just have to say, that's amazing. That clearly took a lot of effort, and they just nailed it. It's not just branching dialogue, it's systemic reactivity. And that alone puts Baldur's Gate 3 in a league of its own. Now I want to briefly touch on romance, and not because I engaged with it, but because I didn't. Just like when I played tabletop D&D, romance just doesn't interest me much, and I was really happy that Baldur's Gate 3 let me opt out entirely. I turned off all the explicit scenes, and I didn't romance anyone, and the game never punished me for that. It was very good. Like, there was a point where Lae'zel tried to romance me, and I was like, no, I'm just not interested. And then it didn't bother me about it for the rest of the game. I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. But my appreciation here is simply that the option exists, but like, you don't have to take it. To be honest, it doesn't really matter to me whether that feature of romance is in the game or not. I just want to be able to not engage with it and then not get punished for it. If you want deep romance paths, they're there. You can take those paths, but if you don't, then the game respects your decision and it doesn't bother you about it the whole game. Now, here's where my opinion may diverge from a lot of the praise you've probably heard about Baldur's Gate 3. The story didn't really grab me for most of the game, especially in Act 1 and 2. I mean, so in Act 3, when my choices started having larger consequences, it did start pulling me in more. But even then, I just found a lot of the story to be unnecessarily complicated. I feel like there's so many different power systems, there's so many different kinds of magic. It's like mentally you're trying to figure out which one is the most powerful, and it's not clear. It's kind of like mixed all together, and it's just kind of convoluted. I found myself having trouble bringing myself to care about several characters in the game. There's a part in the epilogue where it's like 6 months later after the events of the game, and you get to talk to your companions that you had in your party and like find out what they've been up to. And I outright skipped talking to Will and Karlach because I just had no emotional investment in their stories. I found Karlach's character concept to be very uninteresting. I just did not like her as a character and just didn't engage with her except when I absolutely had to. Will was a little bit more engaging, but the story was just uninteresting to me. I really just didn't care. I wanted to talk to the characters that I did engage with, which were Astarion, Shadowheart, Lae'zel, and then to a very minor extent, Gale. Now, the only companion arc that I actually found somewhat interesting was Astarion's. It is actually somewhat interesting, but even then, it didn't fully captivated me. What I want y'all to understand is that this is the important part. That didn't hurt my enjoyment of the game at all. I came to roll dice. I came to play Dungeons and Dragons. Baldur's Gate 3 let me do that. That's what I was looking for. I was looking for the tactical combats and everything like that. So I'm telling you guys that the story was unnecessarily complicated and I didn't really care about a lot of the characters, but that's not really that consequential. Despite my feelings on the narrative, I have to give massive credit to Larian for their respect for D&D lore. The fact that you can meet Elminster in the game is incredible. I had no idea about that going in. That was amazing. Like, Elminster is one of the most powerful wizards in the D&D multiverse of lore. And there's another lore reveal in Act 3 that completely caught me off guard. It was just completely mind-blowing in the best possible way. And I'm not going to spoil it, but I have to say, wow, like Larian, massive credit for that. It felt like the writers were not just using DD&D as a skin, they actually understood the setting. And whether that came from deep research or just genuine familiarity with the Forgotten Realms, like maybe some of these people grew up playing earlier editions of the game, who knows, but the game feels authentic. It feels like Dungeons and Dragons. And so, regardless of how I feel about the story itself, it's clear that the writers respected D&D lore, and I respect them for that. Now, Act 3 is where pacing really started to drag for me. Progressing the story became unclear to the point where I had to look things up just to know what to do next. It became very unclear. I kind of understand why they did that, because they want to make some kind of like mystery points in the quests, but because the city is so big, because there is so much to explore, and because you're not given enough detail, at least in the quest journal, because I forget dialogue all the time, it's unclear as to how you're supposed to advance the story. And I did hit a snag there. There were so many loose ends to tie up, and there were a lot of ones where you just had to kind of search and like feel things out. And if I would have never looked them up on the Baldur's Gate 3 wiki, then I would have never been able to progress the story. Maybe that's a me problem. I can accept that, but I'm telling you the problems that I had. There were also, because there were so many loose ends to tie up, it turned into a long sequence of just boss battle after boss battle after boss battle. I had to fight Orin, and I had to fight Cazador, Gortash, and Ansur, and Raphael, and oh my gosh. Like, it was all the boss battles. They were all mechanically distinct, but none of them were significantly more difficult than the last, with one exception, and that is Raphael. Raphael was easily the hardest boss in the game for me, and even then, I beat him in 2 tries. That's a little bit of a humble brag there. Also, my coworkers kind of hate me for that. But the challenge curve of these boss battles, like, it was fun for sure, but it never quite spiked in the way that I expected it to. And I also want to add that I did play on normal difficulty. I know some people were saying that, like, when you play in honor mode, the bosses have legendary actions and stuff, and that definitely would have made things a lot more difficult. I can acknowledge that for sure, but I'm just telling you my experience with it. On the technical side, I want to say the sound design is fantastic. Combat effects are punchy, environmental audio is immersive, and the soundtrack is excellent, especially Raphael's theme song. That was really cool. And I also really loved the credits music, where they had like the main theme song and it was voiced. A very good soundtrack. But all of those things just come together and it just creates a very engaging atmosphere. And I have absolutely no complaints with the sound design. And I also have to say, in the same vein as that, the graphical design. I mean, this game is very visually stunning in a lot of places. It's really cool. I love the magical effects. I love the environmental effects and how even though it is top down, you can still see the plants swaying in the wind. You can hear ambient conversation that goes back to the sound design. It's very immersive. I just really like the production value of the game as a whole on the technical side is absolutely fantastic. I did have to kind of jury rig things a little bit in order to get it to work on my Linux system. I started playing it on Windows, like when I first started the Let's Play, and then I transitioned to Linux, and there was some visual bugs, and it was a little bit difficult to get it to work. At one point I had to reinstall it, but I did eventually get it working, and my Linux machine was able to run it at a solid capped 60 frames a second with no issues, and that's awesome. That's a really good thing that you can say about a game. It's a feature a lot of modern games cannot boast, is the optimization and the ability for computers to run it. You know, max settings capped out at 60 frames per second. That was really cool. It's very well optimized, I would say. So where does that leave Baldur's Gate 3? For me, it's a great D&D game with a convoluted story, but one that's been crafted with incredible care. It's very clear that even though some of these characters are very forgettable for me, and some of them outright unlikable for me, even so, it was very lovingly made. You can tell they worked really hard on that story, okay? I mean, it does have verisimilitude, okay? And that's not something that all stories can say. But I didn't play this game for its narrative. And even though the story didn't always resonate, it never got in the way of what I did want. Just rolling d20s, building characters, and fighting smart tactical battles. If the next D&D game is even half as good as Baldur's Gate 3, I will buy it without hesitation. And I know Larian is working on the 3rd Divinity game. Because of their performance with Baldur's Gate 3, I'm gonna have to consider it. I know it's not D&D, but I'm gonna have to consider it. And if they ever make a Baldur's Gate 4, pick that up with no hesitation. So there's my full review of Baldur's Gate 3. If you played it, I'd love to know. Did you play it for the story, the combat, both? What was your character like? Let me know in the comments. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dive RPG, strategy game, all those types of games, all those reviews that I do. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. You need to relax.